was telling this story that when he first came and went into the village to interview people to get a feel of how much cooperation or lack thereof, he was saying, so he walked into this house and there was all these older men sitting around, the heads of the village would be sitting there, and he would ask questions, and he would say, every time someone would answer, there was this old man who would sit there and he'd say, go hordi, which means, do I have to translate that? It means, you know, shut up, basically. I mean, or worse. There was one man who would constantly try to stop any time of, you know, communication. He did not want any part of it, and he didn't want anybody else doing it. But every time someone would answer one of Hushang's questions, this guy would shout. And the only thing he would say, he wouldn't say anything else. And if Hushang addressed him, he wouldn't even answer him. So that was the kind of reaction that they had. And evidently, again, based on this stuff of the experience with the gendarmerie. Now, I didn't ever come across them. They were not there. Their presence was absolutely not there when I got there. There was not one to be seen. I mean, you saw them in Khorramabad, you saw them elsewhere, you did not see them anywhere near the project.
Was a teacher there?
In Honam, there wasn't a teacher. There was, as I told you, there was a one-room classroom in Al-Ashtar. In Honam, there wasn't, and in fact, the kids used to walk to, I remember sometimes they'd try and hitch rides. We'd always give rides to kids, or anybody, in fact, going, because there were no cars there. It was just the project cars coming, the jeeps that would come and go. But they would have to go into Al-Ashtar, to this one room. There was a teacher there. Just your typical...
How about the mullah?
You know, it's funny though, I don't have any memory of a mullah being around there. I'm sure there must have been, especially in Teresk. For some reason I'm thinking there was a mullah in Teresk. There definitely was not one in Honam, but Honam is tiny. Okay, Al-Ashtar definitely must have had one. And there may or may not have been interactions with him, with other members of the project.
So, in fact, the governmental and religious figures, so far as you saw, left the project more or less alone.
To my knowledge. What might have existed and would have been taken care of on the Tehran side is that there would have been complications higher up. That, you know, they didn't want us doing certain things, certain activities, that kind of stuff, but it didn't affect any of my level.
Did you ever hear any kind of complaints against the project? Any complaints about the people who worked in the project?
There were a lot of people in the villages, even among the villagers, yeah. They were cynical. A lot of them were very, very cynical about the whole thing. They weren't, you know, just bowled over by the whole thing at all. They were very cynical, I think. And I sort of, you know, in Iran we have this concept of qasmat, fate. And it's certainly in the villages, certainly it is a very, very strong concept there. And it was, well, if it's good today, it's fine, and if it's not, that's fine too. I mean, I don't think any of them were sitting there thinking this is going to make or break their life, it's going to change them dramatically. I don't think so. Though the teachers, the students did take it very seriously. And I think Hushang personally, his personal existence there, served as an arbitrator through many, many of their problems, whether it was a marriage problem or a father having a problem with a disobedient son, whatever. Hushang became to be known as an arbitrator and someone they highly respected. And I think his person was taken very seriously, which was a good thing. Well, the project as a whole, I think, was taken with a grain of salt, actually. And in the end, they were probably right.
Well, but there were no specific serious complaints against any of the people there. I mean, whether anybody or whatever relationship between men and women or you know, whatever. In terms of honesty, in terms of anything like that. Do you remember any of that?
I don't, you know, but I'm sure those things did arise. I'm sure those things did arise. I don't remember any specific examples of that happening, though it seems to me that there was a couple of times where the project had gone out of its limits. In fact, when Majid was building Majid was building a house in the mountains. And there were complications about that, and they didn't like that. There was some kind of a complication involved there, but I think Puri Sultani had joined the project at that time, and she handled things very well also, and I think managed to, you know, soften it over. But I don't remember any specific things.
Now, I remember there were meetings between the staff people and meetings with the staff people and the villagers. Do you remember any of that?
There were meetings like that, but there were really what it was between the staff and the villagers that were working with them. It wouldn't just be any villager walking into a meeting like a town meeting. It was really, there was a bunch of villagers, students and people working for various reasons there, and they would come to these in our big hall into the meetings, and they would talk about various problems and issues and how we're going to go about this, that, or the other. But it wasn't what you're thinking in terms of having all the village come up to a meeting to talk with the project and see what the project is doing. There wasn't that, no.
So in fact, in terms of interaction between the village and the workers, which was, I think, one of the ideas that started the whole project, it never really happened.
Well, I think it was one of the initial, it was one of the purposes of the project, but I think also the purpose was to do it through mediation, and in that sense they were successful. In other words, to go through, instead of being their own mouthpiece, they eventually wanted the villagers to be the mouthpiece to the rest of the villagers. And in fact, that was one of my problems, is that they weren't, because of Hushang. Hushang was becoming himself so much over-glorified that was almost being sidestepped. And the villagers themselves were no longer being taken seriously, and that was going to be a problem. If you weren't from Tehran, did you have credibility? If you weren't from outside Mohammed, if you weren't from, then did you have the credibility of one of the project people or one of the things? See? And that was one of the fallacies within the project, because when they left and the idea was that when they left it would still be functioning. But it wasn't happening. What was happening is that they were taking their word. And the question is did those people that they were training, did they come with the same credibility? And to my mind, no. You see. And that was one of the problems that I had with the whole project. But I really don't know how it ended up. As I say, 7 months just doesn't really give you much time to get your teeth into it or take anything out of it, really.
Do you remember how your day went there? Could you describe the day in Al-Ashtar?
Sure. One of the things I should say before, another project that I had there was this carpet weaving project. Evidently, in years gone by, Lordstan used to have a tradition of carpet weaving, and Majid wanted to reinstate that. And Honam was picked because I was there, I could supervise it and whatever, and it was a small enough village that they could work with it as a village as a whole. Honam was picked as a satellite village for this project. We brought in a specialist, a carpet specialist who knew how to dye the wools, give the patterns, weave them, the whole work. He was a wonderful man from Kashan, and he actually stayed. Did he stay in my area? I don't remember. Well, he stayed, I think, with Khair Ali. He stayed with Khair Ali in a room that Khair Ali had, and he had the actual boiling pots for the coloring and everything in where I was living. I had a little courtyard, and then there was a small little room where we put this huge deek for coloring. And that was fascinating, because then I learned all about how you make the different colors from all natural, because what's happening in today is, it's all chemical. The natural sources are being lost, or I don't know, maybe they're being found again, but at that time there was a concern in Iran about losing the natural dyes. So he was training people to do the natural dyes. Khair Ali, in fact, was supposed to be learning this. And we'd set up a couple of looms at people's house. We chose 1 or 2 girls, young girls, 7, 8 years old. There must have been 4 of them. And we'd set up the looms. They were standing looms, as opposed to gilin. This was actual fash. This was carpet. And then they were given the pattern and the dyes, the wool that we had dyed ourselves, and it was very interesting. And 1 or 2 rugs had actually been produced. They were not as refined as you think of a Persian rug, but it was a good start. It was a very interesting part of that project. And then that little man went back to Kashan. I don't know whatever became of him. But he was a character, learning all about his life, too. And he, of course, thought I was crazy as well. I mean, he just was totally, in awe about what I was doing there. I think a lot had to do with because I was young as well. If I had been older, I think maybe not so much question. But I was only 19, 20 myself. I was 20 at the time. So. Anyway, what my daily life was, well, I'd get up. Actually, I'd jump up because we didn't have a bathroom in the house. I used to run 3 miles out to the bathroom. That was one of my major banes of my existence there, was not having a toilet. And the toilet, the common bathroom there, as you can imagine, was in such horrible condition. Eventually, I insisted that they dig it up because they used to put stones in it. They didn't have toilet paper. They used to literally use stones to clean themselves with. And we finally got an what do you call it, a water hand thing for cleaning. We had them tie it to the door, because it would get stolen. That was a concern. And we had them build another bathroom facing away from Mecca, needless to say. In fact, that was an issue. It was definitely an issue. Anyway, so, and we got that fixed. It was never perfect, believe me. But anyway, I used to get up and run down there, and then I'd wash my face and hands. That's all. I used to go to town, to Al-Ashtar, to take a shower once or twice a week. That was a luxury. And I cut my hair real short so that it did not become an issue. But I used to wash my face and hands, brush my teeth in the cheshmeh. There was a little area which ran through my courtyard. It was sort of like having my own private cheshmeh. It was very nice. And then I would either go out into the village and see one particular family or one child or one thing, or if it was my day for having the women come in, they would come in the morning. This would be, I'd say, I would get up at around 6 there. Then they would come in at around 8, or what, masalan, that time, and we'd talk for a while. Then they would go off, and I would pretty much around 10. By the time we weighed them all and I wrote things, I used to write all the things down and talk about it. Of course, and it was great pleasure for them, so the longer I stretched it, the better it was. And then we would talk and see how the kids were doing, and none of the children, it was interesting, would let them touch me. None of the children would let me. I mean, you don't know. I mean, it's one thing for someone to not, for a baby not to know a stranger, but I mean, these kids would scream, like you were going to kill them. That's high. So I didn't attempt after a while, but I would look at the kids and talk to them about cleanliness and things like that. A lot of them had eye problems, conjunctivitis and things like that, and I'd tell them if I thought they should go and check out with the doctors. A lot of them would have horrible burns because in their homes, which were just kagel, and they were just mud houses, in the center would be a stove. And they would just leave these children there, and they would often get up next to the stove and burn, and they would come in with absolutely horrendous burns. I mean, just make your stomach turn. And I used to have real fights with them, and we were devising a system where we could bring in chicken feed and put it around the stoves. But, I mean, I don't know if any of that ever was going to happen or not, but we would talk about that. Anyway, they would go off at around 10 or whatever, and I would pretty much have the rest of the day to myself, which I would spend in a different manner, either with Khair Ali, or I'd go off with Hushain, who'd come in sometimes and take me with him on his projects to Perez, to other villages, to see whatever he was doing. He'd often take me with him. And then sometimes I'd go into Al-Ashtar for lunch. I had my own jeep, so I was free to come and go. I'd go into Al-Ashtar and take things for lunch. Otherwise, if I'd stay at home, I would just have mast. I used to have bread and mast there a lot, and then sometimes I would have meat maybe 2 or 3 times a week there for lunch. And onions. God, I used to eat onions all the time. And once in a while, we'd have a khoresh. Khair Ali would make me a qeymeh khoresh. And then in the afternoons, again, I would come in, either I would be working with the rangraz, the person doing the the carpeting. We'd do that at least a couple of hours a day was involved with the carpeting, the coloring, and going and visiting the carpet, the looms, seeing how those are doing. And I was really an apprentice to that whole thing. And it was more a learning process for me watching that. And again, a lot of the time was spent speaking to individual households. There were always incidents. For example, Honam was set on a hill, and when the rains would come, it would literally erode out sections of the house. In Perez, there had been a massive flood, and they had dug flood canals and things there. And I had started also the same project in Honam was to set a flood canal, and there was a huge argument about it. It took me weeks to deal with because whose land it should go through. And it was just a tiny canal. I mean, it was maybe 6 inches across. It wasn't a huge gutter or anything like that, but just to allow the natural flow of the water to bypass the village. But all the land around belonged to somebody, so somebody felt that their land was being intruded on. And great debates and discussions would ensue and about why this should be put up. And finally, we convinced whoever it was that it should go up. Hushang helped me on that one, too. I don't think I would have been able to convince anybody alone. In the evenings, sometimes in the afternoons, I would go horseback riding. It's beautiful. It's just incredible, the mountains out there. And it really was, for me personally, a fairy tale life. I mean, it was just so blissful. You can't imagine. And then I would have dinner. Hushang would generally come back for dinner there. And then I would read. I had a lot of books. And I also, every day, would write my daily diary, which unfortunately is lost. I don't have it. Otherwise, this interview would be much more interesting. But that was pretty, it was a very sort of a sleepy life, but there would be every day particular incidences which would, for example, another thing that I just remembered was that we were trying to build the hammam, to fix up the hammam of Honam. There had been one in previous years, the bathhouse, but for some reason it had become defunct, and that was one of our projects, and so I used to check on that and see how that was going and talk to the construction people, and it was an endless battle of trying to get anything done. Nothing just happened. It was very, I don't know if it's true of all villages, I don't know if it's true as a generalization, but there appeared to me a characteristic of apathy. And I think it's again this concept of qasmat, of fate, that, disbelief. Is this really going to work? Is this really going to happen? We'll just, there was a lot of that. And getting things done there was like pulling teeth. In a lot of ways. But eventually the bathhouse did happen, and there was a big debate, should we let it be free, or should we have them pay, and this, that, and the other. And finally we decided we would have them pay 10 reals. Like, what is that the equivalent of? I mean, it must be equivalent 10 cents. 10 reals, because, for no other reason but that they would feel that this belongs to them and that they have to take care of it, and give them a sense of, pride in it. We hoped that if they had to pay for it, that they would have a greater, they would take care of it. If you pay for something, you're not going to just treat it badly, because it needed upkeep, and you have to be clean and, take care of your things when you left to make sure, and like that. And then we had to regulate the men and women hours, things like that. These are things that would come up all the time. There would be a family dispute that would come up, and they would ask me to go over there and deal, not with the man, with the woman. Apart from Khair Ali, there were other people in the village who used to beat their wives regularly. Quite a horrendous state. But anyway, and the irony, of course, in the end, when I left, I probably never would have left, but the irony of it all is that Hushang used to go over there and mediate and say, my God, man, I would deal with the women, he would deal with the men, And I would try to soothe the women, and he would try to talk sense into the men and say, for God's sake, this is not how you deal with human beings. And of course, the irony is that I ended up leaving the whole project because he nearly killed me when he beat me. So that was really...
how was that relationship?
It was, well, of course, he was much older than me. He was in his 40s, and I was in my early 20s. He just, for me, he was such a fascinating character, and he really was a very good man, but I think his only fault was that he could not accept any kind of criticism. He was incredibly benevolent and wonderful as long as he was in total control. But the minute his authority or his opinion was questioned, incredible rage would come into him, and he couldn't deal with it. He just could not deal with any form of criticism. And as I got to know him better and better, I absolutely worshipped him. And I just thought he was the greatest thing. And I thought he was so wonderful, not only in terms of my relations with him, but in what he was giving these people. But it was sort of like, I now see it as a total patronizing effect. It was not a positive. It was, if anything, a negative impact that he left with these people, because he left them hopeless. He left them helpless. He left them with no tools to decide and to develop for themselves, because they were so dependent on him in the end to do it for them. And yet again, through my whatever lack of years or whatever, I saw him as such a tremendous person of good-hearted and wanting to, help these people. And I really respected and admired that in him. Until, as time went on and I got to know him better through my personal relation with him as well as through the project, I could see that he had a tremendous fear of being questioned, a very deep fear of being questioned. I don't know where that came from, but he couldn't take that. And he would cause a lot of problems and complications if he didn't get his way, which is what happened with me. And I just left. I couldn't stay there any longer. It was clear that it was, I had to leave. And it was very sad because I was just getting very involved in it. I really wouldn't have left. I probably would have stayed there at least a year and a half or whatever. And I had also made a very close friend in Puri Sultani. She was also very close to Hushang. And that caused a little bit of a problem between us, I think. But it was a very fascinating time.
Your relationship with Hushang was known to the villagers, or?
Well, evidently, they used to call him. Someone told me later. They used to call him what? Something Ishqi. They used to call him the lover when I left. After I left, they used to call him Ishqi. Was it something Ishqi? They used to call him Sarespi, by the way, which in Luri means white-headed one, which is one for the wise one. That's what the villagers called him, the wise one. And they really thought of him as that. And he was trying to make that position for himself. This is what I only saw as I got to know him, and how wrong it was. Instead of really trying to give his capabilities to these people so that they could handle these situations, especially the youths, he didn't want them to have any of that. He would fight them if he saw they were growing independent. He would fight it. He wanted them to be dependent upon him, which was a horrible thing. It was really a very sad thing for the project.
The relationship, since they called him the lover and so forth, this didn't bring any antagonism, any moral outrage?
It's funny, I expected it, but it didn't. I think we were subtle enough about it that even though we were living together, theoretically, everybody was living together. All the project people lived together in the same building. So the fact that, I was in a place with 2 rooms, it was easy enough for that image to be kept. Even though he was distinctly and clearly in my room with me, there were 2 rooms in the building. So I think if they wanted to think that it wasn't happening, they still could. Otherwise, yes, I often expected it to have explosion. Of course, the project people knew. It wasn't, And Hushang would often overtly show affection towards me. He'd never kissed me in public or anything, but he favored me very clearly in anything. And it's funny though, he was the worst when I came in terms of mocking me and my family name and everything and who I was. By the end of it, the last couple of months of it, he wouldn't tolerate that. If anybody would make any comment about me, he wouldn't tolerate it. You see, and that was very funny.
Now, between the other people who worked on the project and the people who were being trained from among the village, there were women too. I understand there were girls in the...
from the village?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Now, did anything come up in terms of the antagonism against this, because they were relating to the men, rather freely? Was there any antagonism?
There were. That was one of the problems. A lot of, even with the kindergarten teachers, the parents and the villagers, a lot of them wouldn't let these girls because they were in the same classroom with the boys, and evidently there was 1 or 2 instances where the 2, a girl and a boy de Fars, got married. And whereas it wouldn't have been an arranged family marriage, it was arranged by themselves, and that was not done. So some of that did exist. But, you know, I never got behind closed doors in that sense to see how intense that antagonism was. I heard often of cases where there was one instance they had a very good Befar's woman, and the father had pulled her out. And they were very upset, and they were trying to convince the father to let her come back to the project, but he felt that it was too liberal, and it was, you know, that he couldn't let it go on like that.
Do you remember any religious process or any religious ceremony during the time you were there?
I really don't.
Any ceremony at all?
No. That's exactly it. That's why I'm saying. Well, Eid al-Qurban. I remember Eid al-Qurban because at Eid al-Qurban, everybody came over to Honam. The whole all the project friends came over to Honam, and we had a feast there. And they brought a lamb, and of course it went out to the village and what was left, you know. We all ate together. Puri and Majid was there, I believe, even at that time, so that we were all there together. But any kind of Begam Friday prayer, aslan, nothing of that nature.
Did the villagers pray?
I never saw them. Never. Now they might have, but there certainly was never any
Public.
at all. In Al-Ashtar, maybe more so. I'm now thinking of, I might be mistaken, it seems to me I remember hearing the azan there. Seems to me I remember hearing that. But obviously it wasn't such a prominent characteristic that it, you know.
No fasting?
No.
They
No, because
weren't very religious.
not at all. Not at all.
Now, what was the attitude between the staff people concerning Majid?
Well, I see that was an interesting problem. I think they had, as we say in Persian, دستش خونده بودن. I think they had figured him out, in a sense. Majid, to them, was the dreamer. He was, you know, he was definitely the project manager. He was the man who had to get whatever had to get through was, you know, in Tehran's side, that was the one who had to do it. They had no question about that. He was the authority. He was the top man. There was no question about that. The question was that Majid would come sweeping in. Maybe, let me see, when I was there 3-4 times. Once he came with Kitsi too. He would come in and, you know, his sweeping manner for 2-3 days with thousands of ideas. Oh, we have to do this, we have to do that. And everybody would sort of sit there like this, you know, and then off he'd go. And they'd say, okay, back to life, because he would do that. He would sometimes come with hundreds of ideas, and he always had very good ideas, but they weren't necessarily functional. They weren't necessarily something that could be implemented immediately. And often they were contradictory to what had been already implemented. And in the short amount of time that he was there, it wasn't always easy to get him to understand that. And this is where, in a funny way, I came in handy, is because they wouldn't ever be free to speak their mind entirely to him. None of them, not even Hushang, would ever be totally open with him. You know, they were a little bit, you know, he was the big guy from Tehran. And they all knew that he had access to the princess and whatever, and that, you know, they were all sort of a little bit reserved with him in that respect. And so this is where my person came into play, because they would come through me if they wanted him to know something, and he would come through me if he wanted to understand something. It was very funny, because especially at the end, when I had finally broken through and I had established my own identity, I think finally by the end, a lot of these people had a genuine affection for me, and it wasn't anymore an issue of what I was. And so if they did want to get a message across to Majid, they would come to me. And Majid at the same time would say to me, am I getting the whole truth? He'd often ask me that question, am I getting the whole truth? And what's going on here? What does this really mean? You know, these kind of questions. And, you know, I don't know if my interpretations were right or wrong, but he would get my view of it. And sometimes, you know, obviously I didn't have the full picture. But I think that for the people of the project, Majid maybe just, he really didn't know what was happening. You know, he had more ideas. He was more theoretical. He was more imaginative. And these were people that were trying to do it functionally. And he'd come in and he'd go and he'd see the various projects and he'd, pat little kids on their heads and admire this and that and isn't it wonderful and all that. But he wasn't really hardcore there. I think Majid should have lived there. He should have lived there. Well, of course he was building that house to go and live there, and I don't know. But even that, for example, that was totally off in the mountains. It was because it had a beautiful view. It was crazy. I mean, it was just crazy. And I told him so at the time. And why was he was dividing himself? He was separating himself up there, and he was building it, with the fireplace. And I mean, total. It did not mesh with the land, with the people, with the earth. It really didn't, and they knew that. They sensed that. Both the people and the project and the villagers, to the extent that they had any communication with him. But I'm talking to you. You have to appreciate all in retrospect. At the time, so much of this didn't occur to me, and I always thought Majid was wonderful, whatever he did, and he always had fabulous ideas. But in retrospect, I'm telling you that so much of this was ethereal. It wasn't reality. It wasn't here. It wasn't Earth. And that they knew that. If I didn't, they did. I think the project members knew that. Yeah.
Now, if you were to sum up the project, what areas of strength or was there any accomplishment, and what were the failures? How would you sum it up?
God, that's such a difficult question just to say off the top of my head like this. But I'll tell you one of the greatest strengths. One of the greatest strengths would have been that, if nothing else, the fact that that project went sweeping through that area really did open up a lot of eyes, a lot of questions to a lot of people. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of people were sitting there thinking, our lot could be better when that project left. If nothing else, I'm sure they did establish that. That there were people, though despite this whole qasmat thing that, as I say, played a prominent role in there, I think in the youth, in the children, in the young behvars, in the young doctors, in the young teachers, they had this sense. And they had suddenly this curiosity about Khurramabad. And there was this question, could we go to Tehran? Could we go and get a university degree? If nothing else, it opened those kind of eyes. And that, I think, it really deserves full credit for. Well, just that. But on the other side of it is this issue that I was talking about, which was predominantly in Hushang, but also to a greater or lesser degree in other project members, was this patronizing. And even me. Absolutely. No question about it. Even because, as I say, I was following those samples that had been set before me. And all of us, we had this sort of, I suppose, patronizing image of what our function was there, even though it was exactly to the contrary that we were meant to be there. And that's really the sad side of it, is that we weren't supposed to be there answering people's questions. We were supposed to be there teaching them how to answer it themselves. And that was really what Majid wanted. And I'm sure if he hears this, he'll be heartbroken. Though I'm sure I've said this to him myself in other conversations. But I think in the end, his real desire did not happen. Majid's real desire did not happen. And that helping those, in the long run, maybe the one or two, even as I say, I'm not so sure with the Behbars and with the agricultural people and all that, how much did they really understand what they were doing, as opposed to just functionally doing it because someone had said, okay, do this. Would they then be able to innovate? Would they then be able to question, all right, if we can do A, then can A lead to B? I don't know that happened. And I would be surprised. I know that at certain levels it certainly didn't happen. I could see that in the kindergarten teachers that I worked with. And I think that's the sad thing of it. But on the whole, the other side of it is that for those that it did open some eyes. It touched many, many lives there. Of the 6,000 people, I don't think there would have been anyone who didn't know about us. There wouldn't have been anyone who didn't have some question in terms of who we are, if not what we're trying to do. They may not have been terribly impressed with what we were trying to do, but just by the fact of being there and being so totally different might have opened their eyes a little bit to saying their lot could be changed. And believe me, their lot needed to be changed. I mean, they really needed an improvement in life.
From what you described, the villagers had questions and were skeptical. The staff people had questions and were skeptical. The government certainly
had questions
and was skeptical. It's interesting that nevertheless the project was allowed to happen and had considerable possibilities and resources at its disposal. But do you think that this identity of sentiment concerning the project between the staff, the villagers, and the government, how do you explain that? Because obviously they had different attitudes and different functions.
Well, I tell you, I mean, I was always surprised that the government allowed the project to be happening. I was really surprised about that because there were some pretty heavy political issues going under. I mean, really, I mean, some of the messages that the project was giving was that you don't have to be taking this. You know, you can do something about this. You can rise and rebel. I mean, somewhere under there, this message was being given. Whether or not they were being given the tools to do it is another question, but that was basically what the project message was in there. I don't know, I was very curious. I really wanted to be in Al-Ashtar when the revolution happened to see how they would react, because I bet you they would have been much more alert than a lot of other people, a lot of other villagers, you know, in the surrounding area. But in terms of the interaction between the villagers liked us being there. We certainly weren't a hindrance. We helped them in many ways. We got a lot of things in there for them. We got electricity. We got water to the villages. We had done a whole pipeline way up from the mountain into one village that had never had water. They had to walk miles to get their water. You know, we really did do a lot of things. And of course, all under the guise of having them do it themselves. They were the poor guys who had to dig out the thing and everything, but they weren't the people to think of it. You know what I mean? But it was, I think that the villagers were skeptical in the sense that they thought we're here today but gone tomorrow. And the reason I say that is also Khair Ali just said that to me when I left. I was leaving. He was standing there crying, and I was telling him, you know, I'll be back. And he said, no, you won't. You'll never be back. You'll all go. This is all going to be finished. And he was right.
And the staff people were, from what you say, what was their attitude toward the government?
Bad. Very bad. I mean, they were all revolutionaries. All of them, I think. Well, pretty much so, except maybe the doctors. You know? But there was a bunch of them that were definitely anti-Shah. They were all definitely anti-Shah. That's why I had to talk about them, because my family was so much associated with the government.
How were you allowed to work there with such freedom without any presence of the government?
I think there probably was government. I think in fact, one of the issues that they were always talking about among themselves, which one of them was Savaki, which one was a member of the secret police. But I think that there was a little bit of that
if
there.
There was, then how come they allowed them to have such close contact with the people and be so anti-government?
I think that Majid had if it wasn't for Majid, it wouldn't have happened. I think that Majid was putting on enough pressure or begging enough or doing whatever he had to be doing in Tehran to get it to go through. But that was a very real question. I mean, some of these people were blatantly Hushang, I think, was a card-holding member of the Tudeh party. They all were very left-wing individuals, and I think Majid knew that, and the government knew that, but I think Majid just had his connections. And that's how it got done. A lot of things got done that way anyway. I think that under any other circumstances, this would not have been permitted to go on. And I'm sure that Savak was watching this, if they were, I'm sure there must have been somewhere in there, but with a grain of salt. There was one member, I'm trying to remember now, that they used to tease a lot. And he may well have really been, because he was never fully accepted into the group. And they would often not talk about certain subjects when he was around. I don't remember his name right now, but he was definitely questionable. there. And Puri Sultani has a very strong left background, I mean, well known. All of them heavy left. But this is a kind of leftist project. It's sort of the, you know, get out and help. It's that kind of a project that would, people that would be of any kind of a leftist tendency, whether registered or otherwise, I think would have an interest in that kind of a project. So that's not too surprising. What is surprising that it was allowed to exist.
Do you think that there were people there who really did have political plans that used the project as a political vehicle?
You know, I don't know. It's possible. I doubt it, though. It wasn't that, no one there was well organized enough to do it, or if they were very, very slow. Everybody knew too much about each other. I mean, you got to understand, we were a small group. We were all sort of bedmates, so to speak, not physically, but we really were in each other's lives, and we ate together, and everybody was with somebody at all times. Now, unless 3 or 4 of them together were using this as a political machine, it couldn't have happened unless they were all, and the reason I doubt that is because, to my knowledge, none of them came from any one single source. They all came from different areas, and they all met there. As far as I know, the project members did not all know each other from before. So in that sense, I would say no. It could, I mean, unless someone had afterthoughts and later tried to develop it into that. But I don't think so. You know.
So, do you have any other comments about the project and coming up?
About Alishter? No, it was a wonderful experience for me. It was a great learning experience for me. And dealing with all those different kinds of people that I think I had led such a protected life in Tehran, to being exposed to not only the villagers but to people who were, you know, of a lesser, I don't know, less fortunate, I should say, than I had been in life in any sense, was a wonderful experience, a fantastic eye-opener. And the whole countryside, Hushang and I used to go for drives. We went down to Pol Dukhtar, which is an old Akhemenishi ruin. And we had a fascinating experience. Our electric system went out in the car, and we were driving in the dark, and this truck with an Armenian driver went behind us, and he guided us to this where we had to spend the night, and it's just fascinating, you know. We used to go off on other things. So he was a great teacher to me in many senses, and also negatively as well, but it was a wonderful personal experience, if nothing else. I think for everybody there, it touched everybody's lives. We had a very strong family there. And Majid gives that to things. He sort of brings things together that way. So in that sense, it was a wonderful thing. I just wish I could have stayed longer. I definitely would have stayed much longer. What's the only thing?
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.